The snow fell in a slow, almost deliberate rhythm outside the window of Marcus Reed's hotel room. It blanketed the roofs of Prague in quiet white layers, muting the city's usual hum. Inside, Marcus sat at a narrow oak desk, half dressed in a collared shirt and slacks, preparing for a meeting that had taken 3 months to arrange. He had just reviewed the latest figures for a Czech wine distributor interested in his California blends when his phone rang. The display read, "Lydia." He hesitated a moment. Lydia rarely called during his trips. Their communication had been reduced to emojis and clipped replies in recent months, more like pen pals than husband and wife. Still, he swiped to answer. "Hey," he said, trying not to sound tired. "Marcus," she said. No affection. No softness. Just his name. Then, without a breath, "I'm done. I'm leaving. The vineyard's been sold. I've already signed the paperwork." The words landed with all the grace of a stone through glass. She continued, her voice light, almost cheerful. "I've moved on, Marcus. Ben and I are starting over in New Mexico. We're opening a wellness center. A real one. No more Napa crowds. No more tasting notes and profit margins. We're actually going to live." Marcus didn't speak right away. He let her fill the silence. "The buyers will take over next week. I figured you'd be fine staying at a hotel when you got back, you're always more comfortable in those anyway." He exhaled, slowly, feeling the air leave him without effort. "When did the sale close?" he asked. "Yesterday." "Right." He clicked his pen once, then again. "Thanks for letting me know." She laughed, sharp and brief. "You always were so practical." Then the line went dead. He didn't move for almost a full minute. Just sat there, the buzzing silence in his ear now louder than her voice had been. Outside, Prague's skyline was fading into the whiteness of the storm. Tourists started between shops, pulling up scarves, ducking under umbrellas. The world spun on. Inside, Marcus Reed began to think. He was 54, and for nearly 2 decades, he had worked as a wine export consultant. His job was to untangle international regulations, juggle tariffs, forecast agricultural shifts, and structure deals so tightly that no loophole could be exploited. His life was contracts, strategy, and leverage. What Lydia had never understood, what she'd never bothered to learn, was that Marcus played the long game. They'd met 17 years earlier at a vineyard expo in Oregon. Lydia was running hospitality for a trendy organic vineyard. She had a voice like red wine and eyes that challenged everything he thought he knew about confidence. They fell fast. 8 months later, they married in a borrowed barn strung with fairy lights and the scent of oak barrels. 3 years into their marriage, they bought Suntrail Estates, a 25-acre vineyard outside of Napa Valley. Marcus used nearly all of his savings. It was Lydia's dream, a wine-focused retreat with tasting rooms, lavender fields, and yoga decks overlooking the hills. For a while, it worked. They were a team, Marcus handling exports and compliance, Lydia curating experiences for visitors. Their weekends were filled with jazz nights under the stars, wine blending sessions, and garden parties with local chefs. But time, as it does, changed things. 5 years ago, Lydia began pulling away from the operations. She stopped attending planning meetings. The wellness blog she'd started as a side project became a full-time obsession. She began traveling, Arizona, Colorado, Utah. Always chasing silence, balance, peace. A year ago, she joined a spiritual retreat in Sedona and returned with a new light in her eyes and a man named Benito. A soft-spoken yoga instructor with a scruffy beard and a tendency to quote Rumi mid-conversation. Marcus said nothing. No accusations. No arguments. Just observation. He began logging every discrepancy, every financial shift. He noticed the business credit card being used at luxury resorts in Santa Fe. Spa charges. Equipment purchases that had nothing to do with wine. But Marcus never confronted her. He acted. 11 months before that snowy morning in Prague, he transferred Suntrail Estates into a Nevada-based land trust under his name as sole trustee. The paperwork was buried among a stack of refinancing documents Lydia signed in haste one afternoon while texting with a client about an essential oils retreat. "This protects us both," he had told her. That part wasn't entirely a lie. It protected the property. Just not in the way she assumed. Now, alone in his hotel room, Marcus opened his laptop and drafted 2 emails. The first was to Nadia Grossman, his estate attorney of 10 years. The second was to Peter Santos, his financial advisor. Subject line, urgent, fraudulent real estate sale, Suntrail Estates. He hit send. Then he reached under his travel folder and pulled out a small, Laminated document, a certified copy of the land trust deed. He always traveled with it. Some habits, formed during lawsuits and international inspections, never faded. The trust clearly stated that Suntrail Estates was owned entirely by the Reed Family Land Trust. And the only authorized trustee, the only one who could sign, sell, or transfer anything, was Marcus himself. Lydia had no legal right to sell it. The irony was bitter. She had laughed at his habit of reading every contract word for word. She mocked his love for the fine print. "You kill all the magic with your clauses," she used to say. But magic doesn't hold up in court. Contracts do. The snow outside had begun to slow, settling into the cobbled streets like dust on old wine bottles. Marcus stood and stretched. The muscles in his shoulders, tight from travel and tension, loosened with a deliberate crack. He reached for his phone again and dialed Peter's direct number. "She thinks she sold the vineyard," Marcus said when Peter answered. "She didn't. Get ready." Then, calmly, with the steadiness of a man who had waited for this moment, Marcus packed his things. He was going home. Not to argue. Not to rage. But to reclaim what was his. And show Lydia that while love might fade, legal ownership does not. The road to Suntrail Estates hadn't been paved with romance or spontaneity. It was made of spreadsheets, contracts, and tireless work. And Marcus Reed, for all his quiet demeanor, had built it stone by stone. 17 years ago, the vineyard wasn't much, just an old barn with sagging beams and a few tired rows of vines. But Lydia had seen potential. She was magnetic in those days, with a wild optimism that infected everyone around her. Marcus, at 37, had been working in international trade for over a decade, but he'd never owned something that felt like his. Lydia had pitched the dream as they sat under string lights on the porch of a rented cabin near Sonoma. "We create a place people escape to," she said, swirling her wine. "A vineyard, sure, but more than that, a sanctuary." He'd smiled at her then, charmed by the passion in her voice. "And I suppose I'll handle the licensing, insurance, zoning permits, and bookkeeping?" "You always did love the boring parts," she teased. He had. It took everything they had, Marcus's savings, Lydia's inheritance from her late father, and a loan from a small bank in Santa Rosa. They called it Suntrail Estates, a name Lydia had scribbled in a notebook one night after a long walk among the vines. Marcus spent his early mornings on the books and his evenings studying fermentation, pest control strategies, and the nuance of grape varietals. He was never the face of the operation, that was Lydia's role. She curated the aesthetic, copper-tasting room fixtures, locally sourced olive oils for pairing sessions, hand-painted signage. She launched a small Instagram following that grew rapidly, and soon they were featured in niche wine magazines. They had their own rhythm. Marcus traveled for consulting projects, Spain, South Africa, New Zealand, always bringing back ideas to streamline the business. Lydia stayed and nurtured the brand. For a while, it was enough. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things shifted. It started with Lydia's restlessness. She began canceling their morning walks through the vineyard. "Too busy," she'd say, though Marcus noticed her browsing wellness blogs instead. Her conversations changed too, less about wine and terroir, more about alignment and energy. Marcus listened, tried to be supportive. When she mentioned opening a yoga deck near the old oak tree, he cleared the ground himself. When she brought home crystals to rebalance the soil energy, he didn't argue. Then came Ben. Lydia had met him at a sound bath retreat in Arizona. "He's got this way of seeing people," she told Marcus one evening over dinner. "You'd like him. He's grounded." Marcus nodded, biting into his grilled chicken. "And he's a yoga instructor?" "Among other things," she replied. Ben started appearing more frequently, first as a guest instructor for vineyard yoga events, then as a consultant for wellness programming. He was 10 years younger, talked slowly, and quoted philosophers Marcus had only ever skimmed in college. Marcus never confronted Lydia. He didn't need to. He knew what was happening, even if she hadn't admitted it yet, not even to herself. He watched. Tracked expenses. Logged conversations. Scanned receipts for retreats and out-of-state excursions that were never mentioned. Lydia stopped asking about finances altogether. It was during a quiet week, Lydia was in Taos for a silence intensive that Marcus met with Nadia Grossman. He told her everything. "I want the property protected," he said. Nadia, experienced and sharp-eyed, nodded. "Living trust?" "Yes. Irrevocable. My name is sole trustee. Lydia can sign, but she doesn't need to know the details." "She'll need to sign a quitclaim deed," Nadia warned. "It has to look like part of another transaction." Marcus considered this. We're refinancing our tasting room next month. Bury it there." And so, with a few careful strokes of a pen, and Lydia half listening while texting a client about an upcoming retreat, Suntrail Estates was no longer owned by Marcus and Lydia Reed. It belonged solely to the Reed Family Land Trust. And Marcus controlled it entirely. In the months that followed, Lydia grew more distant. She stopped sleeping in their bedroom, citing emotional fatigue. Marcus didn't argue. He spent more time abroad, diving into consulting work with renewed focus. He began storing important paperwork in a portable safe, keeping copies of all major documents in cloud storage under new encryption. He also began working with Peter Santos to restructure their joint finances. Slowly, carefully, he moved assets into protected accounts. He stopped contributing to their shared credit card and redirected his salary to a new private account. By the time Lydia made her move, selling the vineyard behind his back, Marcus had already positioned himself like a seasoned chess player. And Lydia? She had assumed he was asleep at the wheel. When she called from California and declared the sale final, Marcus was seated in a high-rise suite overlooking Old Town Prague. But his mind wasn't on the Vltava River or the cobblestone beauty of the city, it was on the fine print. He knew Lydia hadn't read the trust deed. She never did. He also knew no bank would process the full transfer of a property held in a trust without trustee approval. Which meant one of two things: either Lydia had attempted to falsify documents, or she'd sold to someone shady enough to overlook them. Both scenarios were salvageable. And both were in his favor. That night, Marcus walked through the snowy Prague streets until he found a cafe tucked in a quiet alley. He sat alone, sipping a lukewarm espresso, watching people pass by in thick coats and laughter. He didn't feel rage. Or betrayal. What he felt was clarity. This wasn't about Lydia leaving. That part, he could have lived with. What burned was the assumption that he wouldn't fight back, wouldn't notice, wouldn't care. But Marcus Reed had built his life on attention to detail. And she just reminded him why that mattered. As he walked back to the hotel, he called Nadia again. "She tried to sell it," he said. "She can't," Nadia replied. "And if someone processed it, it's fraud." Marcus smiled. "I want every title agency in Napa alerted," he said. "No one moves a thing without me." Then, quietly, he booked a one-way flight back to California. The game had changed. And this time, he wasn't negotiating for a client. He was fighting for himself. The red-eye from Prague landed in San Francisco just after sunrise, the sky a soft blend of peach and lavender stretching over the bay. Marcus Reed stepped off the plane with a calm that felt foreign. It wasn't numbness, not entirely, but something more deliberate. A slow, calculated steadiness. He didn't bother calling a car service. Instead, he rented a used truck from a no-frills counter near the terminal. A Ford, gray and dented. Functional. Quiet. Like him. As the city slipped behind him and Napa's golden hills emerged, Marcus thought about the vineyard. Not the image Lydia had crafted for social media, the curated sunsets, rustic charm, carefully filtered life, but the real vineyard. The years of rot repair, the rootstock surveys, the nights spent watching frost creep toward the grapes. This wasn't just property. This was labor. His labor. And it wasn't for sale. By the time he pulled onto the gravel drive of Suntrail Estates, the sun was high and sharp, casting long shadows from the olive trees near the entrance. A silver Lexus SUV sat crookedly in his usual parking space. Marcus noted the plate number without thinking, a reflex born from years of global deal-making where details mattered. The gate was wide open. That alone made his jaw tighten. He stepped through it and walked slowly past the tasting room's terrace, hearing voices from inside. "Maybe we move the meditation dome to the West Hill," a man said, cheerful, enthusiastic. "Better sunrise light, right?" "I like that," Lydia's voice replied. "And I think we take down the bottling shed. It's such an eyesore." Marcus entered the tasting room without announcing himself. Lydia stood at the counter, her phone in one hand, a smoothie in the other. She wore a loose linen dress and no shoes. Ben stood behind her, barefoot as well, gesturing toward an open laptop screen showing architectural sketches. They both froze. Lydia's smoothie slipped slightly in her grip. "Marcus?" she said. He nodded, placing his briefcase on the table. "Didn't expect me so soon?" Ben straightened, trying for charm. "Hey, man. Didn't realize you were back stateside." "I am." Marcus turned toward Lydia. And apparently just in time. Lydia recovered quickly. "Look, Marcus. Let's not make this difficult. The sale's already been processed. The new owners are fine with us staying a few weeks to wrap things up. You've always been away so much, what's the difference? Marcus didn't flinch. He simply opened the briefcase and slid a folder across the table. This is the deed to Suntrail Estates. It is owned by the Reed Family Land Trust, of which I am the sole trustee. You signed the transfer paperwork last May, buried in the refinancing package for the South Fields. Ben stepped back. Wait. What? Marcus looked at him. She had no legal authority to sell. Any transaction she attempted is invalid. Fraudulent. Lydia's eyes flicked over the documents, and the color began to drain from her face. No, she whispered. This isn't. I signed that for the tasting room refee. You did, Marcus replied evenly. But that refee was structured to include the transfer of ownership. It's legal. Fully notarized. Filed. You never read the fine print. Ben's hands dropped to his sides. You told me the sale was final. It was supposed to be, Lydia said, still flipping through pages. We signed everything. We. Marcus cut in. With whom? Lydia blinked. What? Who's the buyer, Lydia? She hesitated. Ben sighed. A group out of Albuquerque. Silent Partners. Marcus arched an eyebrow. You mean your brother's LLC? Ben flinched. I had my attorney run the property transfer. The buyer is a shell company controlled by Jason Abrams, your brother, Marcus said. It's a fraudulent transaction designed to appear legitimate so you could claim the proceeds and use them for your wellness startup. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lydia dropped into a chair, clutching her forehead. You tricked me. No, Marcus replied. I protected myself. You ignored every warning sign. Every instinct. And now here we are. Ben glanced at the door. I should. Probably go. You should, Marcus said. But not before you pass a message to Jason. If he doesn't formally rescind the purchase offer by 5 p.m. today, we file a fraud report with the district attorney. Ben's throat moved as he swallowed. Okay. He grabbed his backpack and practically jogged out of the room. When they were alone, Lydia tried a different tone. Softer. Marcus. We don't have to fight like this. We can split the money. You don't want a public mess. Neither do I. There is no money to split, Marcus replied. There was no legal sale. You don't own this land. And you haven't for nearly a year. Her composure cracked. I built this with you. You think you can just erase me from it? No, he said, voice cool. You erased yourself the moment you tried to sell it behind my back. Lydia stood slowly, eyes sharp with fury. I'll get a lawyer. You can't shut me out of everything. You absolutely should get a lawyer, Marcus agreed. Because this is far from over. But I suggest one who understands trusts. And criminal fraud. He picked up his briefcase and turned to leave. I'll be staying at the Vineyard Guest House tonight. My name is still on the utilities. And on every piece of legal documentation that matters. He paused at the door, looking back at her. This isn't about revenge, Lydia. It's about boundaries. About consequences. And with that, he walked out into the golden light of late afternoon, the vines swaying in the breeze. Behind him, the house they had built together now stood like a monument to everything unspoken. And everything he was finally ready to confront. The following morning, Marcus Reed stood at the counter of a local cafe in downtown Napa, stirring honey into his black tea with meticulous slowness. He wasn't hungry. He hadn't slept much either. But he needed the ritual. He needed the quiet, deliberate actions to brace himself for the day ahead. The guest house at Suntrail Estates had been exactly as he remembered, creaky floors, the faint scent of lavender from the herb garden, and silence, thick, unfamiliar silence. Lydia hadn't come near it. She and Ben had spent the night in the main house, presumably arguing, possibly scrambling. Marcus hadn't heard a word. But he could feel the panic setting in across the gravel driveway like a weather system. By 8 a.m., he was in the offices of Grossman and Santos. Peter Santos was waiting with 2 coffees, already seated across from Nadia Grossman, who had a thick stack of files open in front of her. The room smelled of dry paper and morning stress. She didn't just try to sell the vineyard, Nadia said without preamble, she tried to launder it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Peter pushed a set of documents forward. We dug into the shell company, Emerald Horizon LLC. It's registered in New Mexico. But ownership traces back to Jason Abrams, Ben's older brother. The buyers were intending to flip the vineyard within 60 days. Flip it? Marcus echoed. For a 40% markup, Peter added. They had a buyer lined up, someone in Los Angeles who thought they were purchasing a fully operational, debt-free vineyard with expansion permits. The only way they could present that picture was by pretending the property was free of encumbrances. Which, of course, it's not. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. So it wasn't just personal. No, Nadia said. It was a coordinated financial scheme. And now that Jason has been contacted and knows you're aware of his role, he's worried. He sent a message this morning through his attorney. He's rescinding the offer. Marcus nodded. Good. Peter slid over another folder. That's not all. Lydia's been moving funds from your joint accounts for over a year. We estimate close to $180,000 has been diverted into accounts tied to the Vital Earth Retreat, the wellness center she's building with Ben. Marcus stared at the number, unmoved. I assume she'll claim it was her share of the marital assets. She might, Nadia said, but it was done without disclosure or agreement. In California, that opens the door to breach of fiduciary duty between spouses. So what are our options? Peter spoke first. You've got the legal high ground on the trust. She can't touch the vineyard. That's safe. The siphoned funds are trickier, but not untouchable. If you push hard, we can demand restitution and even involve the district attorney for financial fraud and attempted property theft. Marcus looked out the window at the morning bustle of Napa. For a moment, he imagined taking it all the way. Burning everything she had left, dragging her through court, and making sure every one of her clients knew what she'd done. But it wasn't revenge he wanted. It was resolution. No criminal charges, he said. Not yet. But I want a clean break. I want her out of the vineyard. I want full ownership recognized, all claims waived. And I want at least 60% of the diverted funds returned. Nadia smirked. You're being generous. I'm being fair, Marcus replied. Peter began drafting a settlement proposal. We'll offer her the chance to walk away with her business. No claims to the property. No charges. If she refuses, then we take it all the way, Marcus said calmly. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to Suntrail. Lydia's car was gone, but Ben's Lexus still sat in the driveway. The front door of the main house was unlocked, again. Inside, the air was stale. Boxes were piled near the entryway, hastily packed with ceramics, retreat flyers, and handmade essential oils. Marcus walked in without hesitation. Ben stood in the living room, zipping up a duffel bag. He looked up, startled. Hey, I was just grabbing the last of my stuff. Marcus didn't respond right away. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Lydia tell you about the settlement offer? Ben shifted his weight. She said you're trying to bleed her dry. That you wanted everything. What I want, Marcus said slowly, is what's mine. What I built. What she tried to steal. Ben sighed. Look, man. This was never personal. She said you were gone all the time. That you didn't care. That she felt invisible. And stealing my vineyard made her feel seen? Ben didn't answer. Marcus stepped forward. Here's what's going to happen. Your brother is backing out. The sale is dead. If Lydia doesn't accept the settlement, we go to court. And once that happens, you both become part of a fraud case. Attempted theft. Financial misconduct. It won't just be headlines, it'll be criminal. Ben opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His jaw flexed. What do you want from me? I want you to disappear. Take your sage bundles and start up crystals and get out of my house. And if you care about Lydia even half as much as you pretend, convince her to take the deal. Because I guarantee she won't like the alternative. Ben picked up his bag and left without another word. By the next morning, Lydia's lawyer sent a message. My client is unwilling to accept your terms. We will contest the trust in court. Marcus forwarded it to Nadia and Peter. She's getting bad advice, Nadia said. But we're ready. Let's file the emergency motion to freeze all property transfers and start preparing for trial. Marcus spent the rest of the week extricating himself from every financial tether he had with Lydia. He visited banks, updated passwords, redirected retirement contributions, and closed joint accounts. On Friday evening, he sat on the porch of the guest house, sipping a glass of their 2017 Merlot, watching the sun dip below the vineyard hills. He had expected to feel more anger by now. But all he felt was clarity. This wasn't just about money, or trust, or even betrayal. It was about choosing to stop letting someone rewrite the ending of a story he'd worked so hard to build. The vineyard was still his. And come what may, that would never change. 3 weeks later, the conference room at Grossman & Santos was cool and quiet, its polished surfaces gleaming beneath soft overhead lighting. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, spring had begun to coax green buds onto the vineyard hills in the distance. It should have been a beautiful morning. Instead, It felt surgical. Marcus sat at the far end of the long oak table, flanked by his attorney, Nadia Grossman. Beside her, Peter Santos quietly flipped through a binder, only stopping now and then to highlight a page or just a paperclip. Marcus himself sat still, hands folded, a closed file in front of him, his expression unreadable. Across from him sat Lydia, dressed impeccably as always, blouse crisp, hair perfect, but her energy was different now. Tense. Hollow. Next to her, a young attorney in a slim navy suit fidgeted with his pen, clearly out of his depth. He looked like he'd expected a negotiation. What he got instead was a reckoning. "Let's begin," Nadia said, sliding 3 documents forward. "These will be entered into the pre-trial record unless settlement is reached today." The young lawyer, Cameron, according to the tag on his briefcase, glanced nervously at the paperwork. "We request a review before submitting anything formally." "Of course," Nadia replied smoothly, leaning back in her chair like a cat stretching in the sun. "But you should know we're not here to debate the facts. These documents are the facts." Lydia didn't speak. She stared at the table, her jaw clenched. Marcus remained silent, watching her. Cameron scanned the top document. His brow furrowed, and then his eyes widened. This is a notarized trust transfer from last year. The vineyard belongs to the Reed Family Land Trust, Nadia finished. Sole trustee, Marcus Reed. Your client has no ownership rights, regardless of marital status. It was signed, sealed, and filed with the state before any supposed sale was initiated. She slid the second document forward. This is a certified financial trail showing the withdrawal of over $170,000 from jointly held accounts into accounts tied to Vital Earth Retreat, a for-profit entity registered by your client and Benjamin Abrams without disclosure or consent. Cameron swallowed. "And this," she said, sliding the third document across the table, "is an affidavit from Jason Abrams, confirming the fraudulent attempt to acquire Suntrail Estates through a shell company. He was prepared to testify under subpoena but preferred a voluntary statement." Lydia's face went rigid. She still didn't look up. Cameron turned to her, whispered something, but she waved him off. "We're prepared to settle," he said after a moment. "My client is willing to negotiate terms that acknowledge the joint nature of their finances." "There's no negotiation," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but final. "This is the offer." Peter pushed a single-page agreement across the table. "Settlement terms. Lydia Reed returns $100,000 of misappropriated funds within 30 days. She relinquishes all claims to Suntrail Estates and any properties under the Reed Trust. Marcus Reed waives any rights to Vital Earth Retreat and will not pursue criminal charges. Neither party will contact the other outside legal channels going forward." Cameron read it. His face paled. "And if she refuses? Then we proceed to trial," Nadia replied, "and refer this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into financial fraud, attempted property theft, and conspiracy." Lydia finally looked up. Her voice, when it came, was cracked but steady. "You really want to destroy me, Marcus?" "No," he said. "You already did that to yourself. I just want to stop you from doing it again." There was a long silence. Then Lydia turned to her lawyer and murmured, "We'll accept the terms." Cameron nodded slowly. "We'll need 48 hours for official signatures and fund transfers." 30 days, Nadia said. "Not 1 hour more." The divorce was finalized 2 months later. No headlines. No drama. Just clean legal filings, a private judge, and signatures. Marcus didn't attend the final hearing in person. He didn't need to. The moment Lydia had signed that settlement, everything shifted. Suntrail Estates was his, wholly and uncontestably. The funds she'd returned were promptly reinvested, this time into a small warehouse property outside Sacramento, part of a long-term logistics project Marcus had been tracking for years. Reliable tenants, steady income. No drama. He didn't ask about Lydia again. He didn't search her name or check social media. But word traveled. The retreat center had opened in Taos, smaller than planned, funded by Lydia's portion of their shared accounts and whatever Ben could scrape together. A few workshops. Some healing weekends. Reviews online were mixed, some glowing, others disappointed in the chaos of the administration. Marcus felt nothing. No pleasure, no pain. Just detachment. 6 months after the final signatures, Marcus stood on the wraparound deck at Suntrail, the air warm and still, the vines below glowing gold under a late afternoon sun. He sipped a glass of their 2020 Tempranillo, one of Lydia's favorite vintages, and let the quiet settle around him like an old coat. The renovations were complete. New solar panels on the guest house roof. The bottling shed had been upgraded, not demolished. The yoga deck remained, but he'd turned it into a shaded patio for wine and cheese pairings. The property had changed, but it had changed with him. Not in reaction to what Lydia had done, but in reflection of who he had become. He wasn't a man betrayed anymore. He was a man restored. His phone buzzed. A message from Peter. New vineyard investment prospect in Mendocino. Small but promising. Want me to schedule a call? Marcus smiled, typed back. Let's talk tomorrow. I'm enjoying the view tonight. He turned back to the hills, where the last light of day was slipping behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across rows of grapes growing in silent precision. There had been a time he thought his life ended the moment Lydia laughed on the phone and told him she was leaving. But here, now, on land that was once nearly stolen from him, Marcus Reed stood whole. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just steady. And sometimes, he realized, that's more than enough.